Okay, I'll call the September 18th, 2018 meeting of the JEA Board to order. I believe we have Mr. Campion on the phone. Mr. Campion, are you with us? If he is, he's on mute. And I'm also advised that we may have Ms. Flanagan dialing in shortly. Okay, I'd like to ask everyone to rise for a moment of reflection and then join me in the pledge of the flag. Ask you to remember our friends in the Carolinas, in particular the mutual aid teams that JEA has sent to the Carolinas. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Campion says he's not on mute.
Oh, no, you're fine.
I just heard someone drop off.
Let's try Mr. Campion again. Mr. Campion? If you can hear us, we're experiencing technical difficulties. We'll try and get you on.
He says the volume must be down.
Mr. Campion? Mr. Campion? Okay, we'll continue. Hopefully we can resolve that. We've had an agenda published. I'd ask for a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Hussein. Or Mr. Cumber, is there a second? Second. Thank you, Reverend Newbill. All in favor of adopting the agenda as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, passes unanimously. Mr. Zahn, safety briefing.
Sure. Safety is a core value of JEA. In the event of emergency, Mr. Hobson, are you willing to call 911? Yes. Mr. Bros, CPR? In the event of an evacuation, please identify the neighbor to your right, and please use the stairs immediately to the left of the elevator. Proceed in an orderly fashion down the stairs and across the plaza onto the southeast corner of Main and Church. And also, please, as a reminder, put your cell phones on silent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Zahn. Chief Legal Officer, Ms. Brooks, Sunshine Law Statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a duly noticed public meeting that has been noticed properly. Minutes are being taken. We have quorum present in the room, and we're in good order to proceed.
Thank you very much. Now turn to comments from the public. I've got one card, Mr. Overton. Welcome, Mr. Overton. You'd state your name and address for the record.
I am Jim Overton, 3751 Oak Point Avenue, Jacksonville 32210. I'm here today representing Scenic Jacksonville. The mission of Scenic Jacksonville is to preserve, protect, and enhance the scenic character and beauty of Jacksonville, Florida. Scenic Jacksonville has long had a goal of encouraging the conversion of overhead utility lines to underground. Our interest has been primarily the preservation of the canopy, but since recent hurricane seasons with power outages mostly caused by falling trees, the JEA, like other utilities, has sought to harden the distribution system to minimize those outages. Unfortunately, much of that hardening means unsightly damage to and removal of the tree canopy. We believe that Scenic Jacksonville believes the city and the JEA should adopt a goal to both minimize tree trimming and to make the distribution system more reliable in storms by systematically undergrounding nearly all of the system in the neighborhoods. Recently, Scenic Jacksonville formed a study committee and has proposed a plan to accomplish that goal through a 30-year program with a shared cost burden, the details of which are contained in the white paper I've distributed to you today. Please read and consider our recommendations. Together with the City Council and the administration, let's make Jacksonville a more beautiful city and one with exceptionally reliable electric service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Overton. We appreciate your comments and the hard work of you and your group. We commit to, at JEA, we commit to give due consideration to the proposals of undergrounding. We have in the past, something we continue to study. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to the council liaison, Mr. Schellenberg.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Mr. Howard. I don't have anything to say this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't see Dr. Gaffney here. Missing? Nope. No word from the mayor. Very good. We'll move on to section 3A, the consent agenda. It's been circulated in your board materials. So I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Reverend Newbill. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson-Harris. Is there, no discussion, so all in favor of the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Carries unanimously. Now I'll call on Ms. Dykes, yes, for our monthly financial and operations report. Thank you.
Good afternoon. At your seats, you'll find a supplemental page that's been provided. It's the page that's a fold-out page that contains the dashboard of operating metrics for JEA. That's what I'll cover for this discussion this afternoon. This is, in terms of the rhythm of providing these operational updates, what we've done is adopted a format where we do essentially every other month. This is the summary month. Next month will be have much more detail in terms of the report out of the operations metrics that are provided. This dashboard has been aligned with the strategic framework that was approved by the board, and it's been aligned around the 4 measures of value that the JEA board recognized. And those include customer value, financial value, community impact value, and environmental value. It's been further separated into 3 different sections of metrics. There's a section at the top called Metrics We Watch. Those are metrics that are important to the performance of the business, but ones that we don't directly influence from year to year. They're ones that are, for example, driven primarily by weather changes. There's a section in the middle called Critical Operations Metrics, Short-Term Influence. Those primarily capture the metrics that we set goals around as JEA employees, and that we do have the ability to influence within a year. And then the final section at the bottom is Strategic Metrics, Long-Term Influence. Those metrics guide and inform our strategic planning process. They're metrics that we have the ability to influence over the long term, and in fact, we set our short-term goals in that middle section to drive the long-term performance that you'll find in the bottom section. In the interest of time, I don't plan to review this worksheet line by line. I will point out we are in the final month of our fiscal year, so the next report out to the board will include final or near final report outs for each of these metrics that were measured for this fiscal year. We also have been revamping this dashboard to capture the goals that we've set for the organization for fiscal year 2019. So in our next conversation, we'll include not only a report out on our actual performance for 18, but we'll also include a proposal of our goals operationally for fiscal year 19. The final thing I'd like to call your attention to on this page is the bottom section, which has these speedometers. That bottom section is JEA's Pay for Performance program. Those are the metrics that were selected at the beginning of the fiscal year that were used to drive performance throughout the organization. On the top line, those metrics primarily relate to cost. And we did set stretch goals for all 6 of these metrics that are used for our Pay for Performance program. Of the cost goals that are found at the top, the one that we're most likely to make is on the electric side, our non-fuel dollars per megawatt hour metric. Our ability to make that goal will depend on us keeping our foot on the gas on cost controls all the way through the end of this fiscal year. On the bottom line of the speedometers, you'll see 3 other goals that were set and used for the Pay for Performance program. Our safety goal, which was a stretch goal and which it is possible for us to make this fiscal year if we do not have any more recordables between now and the end of the fiscal year, but it would require 0 between now and the end of the year. On the JD Power customer satisfaction goals, those are final for the year. We have not made the residential goal, which again was a stretch goal. We have made the commercial goal for JD Power customer satisfaction. Any questions on the dashboard?
Any questions? Mr. Cumber?
What does ETR stand for?
Estimated time of restoration. When a customer loses power, we provide them with an estimated time of restoration, and we measure the accuracy of that.
And then the only other thing, Mr. Chairman, that I would say is I give Mike a hard time when Semi 5 goes up, so I do have to congratulate him when it does go down. So I do want
Thank
to
you,
point
Mr.
that
Cumber.
out.
Mike's team's done a great job going
He
after
has.
that metric.
Duly noted. Reverend Newville, any questions regarding the financial and operations dashboard? Ms. Green?
No.
Ms. Johnson?
No.
Mr. Campion, did you join us?
I am here. Can you hear me?
I can. Fantastic. Welcome.
Marvelous. We overcame the technology barrier.
You've cracked it. This was distributed electronically. Were there changes from the electronic version circulated by Ms. Charleroi?
There were not.
So you have this in your emails. Did you have an opportunity to review it? Do you have any questions, Mr. Campion?
I have certainly reviewed it, and I have no questions at this time.
Thank you very much. I have one question. Ms. Dykes, I noticed in the MD&A portion, which, again, kudos to you and your team. I really appreciate the dashboard and the presentation. A lot of information. A lot of information here. In the MD&A, is it just a coincidence that sales are up 1.6% and total customer count is up 1.6% also?
It is a strange coincidence.
Okay. Just, yep. I wonder if there was some correlation I was missing there. It's really the degree days that are up that are driving the increase in sales?
Yes, yeah, and in fact, I expect to end the year up a little bit more just because it's been so hot this month.
I've noticed. Thank you. If there are no other questions regarding the dashboard,
I'd just like to commend the senior team and all the directors, and especially the finance team, Mr. Wanamaker's group. This is a dramatic shift relative to management of the company and reporting, and also creating clarity throughout the organization. And it should not go without note of the amount of work effort they've put in over the last couple of months to get to this point, as well as to continue to progress. So, again, a great deal of thank you to the entire staff.
thank you. Add my thanks to that as well. Thank you. Mr. Zahn, strategic planning consultant selection.
Sure. As the board may recall, as part of the transition plan that was presented in April, one of the things was to select a strategic consultant to facilitate strategic planning for updating this 10-year strategic plan for JEA. This was discussed a number of times, and then also at the August board meeting, I'd asked the board for the ability to proceed forward. We proceeded on a formal RFP, received about 10 formal responses, went through a selection process down to a short list of 3, had a presentation from the top 3, and then the finalist, McKinsey, was selected. At the end of the day, from an authority perspective, I have the authority to move forward. I just felt as an interim CEO, it was best to provide this to the board for them to consider and to approve going forward, as opposed to just take that unilaterally.
Thank you, Mr. Zahn. So that's presented for action to the board. May I have a motion to approve the hiring of McKinsey to serve as the strategic consultant pursuant to ITM 12418? Thank you, Reverend Newbill. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Open it up for discussion. Ms. Johnson?
None for me.
Ms. Green?
No.
Reverend Newbill? Mr. Campion, any questions regarding the proposal to hire McKinsey?
No, very pleased to see Mackenzie was hired. I have a lot of experience myself with Mackenzie in the utility space, and I think they'll do a fantastic job for us.
Thank you, Mr. Campion. Mr. Cumber?
Just one more of an informational. So on the presentation that was given, page 3 just had names blank on there. Was that just by accident?
This is a follow-up presentation that was made during, after the formal RFP presentation. So if you'd like, I can follow up with the formal RFP, which has a list of the entire staff that was going to be allocated to the project.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then,
We felt that this just was a little bit more informative in terms of very specific questions.
what was the, and I'm sorry, I'm just kind of flipping through this. What was the timeline associated with the scope of work and how that fits to your strategic plan timeline that you presented to us?
I believe that, it's in 2 phases. Ultimately, the first phase would be about a 2 to 3 month engagement, with the follow-on being phase 2, which might be somewhere around 6 months. At the end of the day, this is something that probably could be discussed with the board as to when does the engagement actually start in conjunction with a permanent CEO selection, and how does the board want to manage through that process?
And then since you brought this to the board, what's the fee associated with this?
I don't have that. Do you have that up the top, Jenny? We had provided this in terms of ranking with
Yeah, I saw that.
non-dollar
Yeah,
amounts
no,
on
yeah.
it. We just Jenny,
Yes, sir.
would you?
Hi, Jenny McCullum, Procurement Director for JEA. So the fee associated with it was $308,000. We did a BAFO, so we actually saw a reduction after some clarifications through the presentation. So we saw a savings of about $100,000.
Great.
Very good.
That's it, Mr. Chairman.
I had one follow-up question. Did we ever see a listing of representative engagements for similar services, perhaps in our peer group, from McKinsey or the others, but particularly McKinsey?
I know we did reach out to a number of peers and asked for their input relative to references as to whether or not we saw the actual engagement. Jenny probably can answer that.
We did receive a list of qualifications. They were, submitted with the bids. We can get you some backup information for that if you'd like to see the specifics that they had laid out for us.
Well, let me just ask the question a different way. Have they done similar work for other utilities in our peer group
Yes.
size?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they have.
And Ms. Dykes and I did make personal phone calls to a number of other institutions of our size to ask of their experience with McKinsey,
Okay.
as well as the other participants in the RFP process.
And I assume it was generally favorable.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Jenny.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions regarding the engagement of McKinsey? All in favor of awarding the Strategic Planning Implementation Consulting Services contract under ITN 124-18 to McKinsey, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, all right, all in favor, done, unanimous, good. Thank you, Mr. Zahn. Mr. Wanamaker. Regulatory action approval, post-employment benefits other than pensions. What is that?
Yes, this will be an exciting topic. We have 2 year-end accounting items to bring to the board today. The first one is related to the implementation of GASB 75, which is a new accounting standard for financial reporting of other post-employment benefits, or OPEB. These are medical benefits that we make available to our retirees. Effective for this fiscal year ending September 30th, JEA will be required to record a net OPEB liability on its balance sheet. Prior to the implementation of GASB 75, this OPEB liability was included as a footnote to the financial statements. Under JEA's regulatory accounting methodology, certain revenues and costs may be deferred to the balance sheet as regulatory assets or liabilities that would otherwise be charged to revenue or expense in the current period under GAAP, or generally accepted accounting principles. As outlined in the pricing policy, all regulatory accounting actions by JEA are presented to the board for approval. Consistent with this methodology, we're asking the board for approval to create an offsetting regulatory asset in the amount of $34.5 million, representing the commitment to recover this unfunded OPEB liability from ratepayers in the future. Without this regulatory asset, changes in the OPEB liability from a year-to-year basis will be required to be recorded in the income statement as an expense and would create GAAP earnings and debt service coverage volatility. Through this regulatory treatment, the related charges in the OPEB, the related changes in the OPEB liability will be deferred as a regulatory item. And this regulatory construct is also consistent with how the board has approved for the treatment of JEA's pension liability. In summary, this treatment will reduce the volatility of recognition of the OPEB expense and align GAAP reporting and debt service coverage calculations with the methodology used for establishing our revenue requirements. It is important to note that the creation of this regulatory asset will not change our current revenue requirements or impact customer rates. At this time, I'd be happy to take any questions on this item.
Any questions for Mr. Wanamaker regarding the change in accounting for OPEB? Mr. Cumber.
Brian, thanks for that. I noticed in the memo to the board, the last sentence and recommendation says, in addition, staff recommends that annual OPEB contributions be included as a cost in developing the annual revenue requirements for the establishment of customer rates. You ended your presentation by saying that it would not affect rates. So can you just square that last sentence with?
So we currently have the actuarially required contribution is included in our rates as part of our expense, the contribution that we make on an annual basis. That would continue, and this would allow us to defer the cost of any changes from a year-to-year basis over time, as opposed to collecting it in the current year. So, for example, if the liability increased from one year to the next as a result of, let's say, fund performance, we would have to either recognize that expense on the income statement or collect that additional money in that current year in order to maintain our current net income and coverage requirements.
Okay.
So it doesn't result in an increase because it's already included?
It's
Historically
that's
included.
exactly right. It's already historically included, and this keeps the collection of it consistent with the way that we're doing it today.
Thank you.
And are we approving this, I think you said 32 million, and you said it was an unfunded liability. What is the expectation of what this liability looks like moving forward? And how do we ensure that it doesn't become something that does affect customer rates?
So as part of the, as part of our, it's every year we do a study on the actuarial liability of the program. And we get that report back and we compare that to the funds on deposit for that liability. The difference between those two is the unfunded liability portion of it. And as part of that study, there is a actuarially required funding amount that goes into our revenue requirement for the next year and goes into our budget. And the intent of that is to make up not only the current portion of that liability, but also to collect for the portion of the unfunded liability associated with that.
I'm good, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. Ms. Johnson?
No questions. Thank
Ms.
you.
Green?
No, I think my question was answered regarding the liability increase.
Reverend Newbill?
So would that be a $32 million extra on top of what we're doing now?
So it's currently a unfunded liability. The ask today is to create a regulatory asset, which is a commitment to collect that amount over time.
I got you.
And so when we create that, it allows us to put that on the balance sheet as an offsetting item.
Thank you.
Mr. Campion?
I'm fine, thank you.
Very good. I'd ask for a motion then to approve the recommendation of staff to include the OPEB liability and deferral of charges in the related net OPEB liability as regulatory items, and in addition, include the annual OPEB contributions as a cost in developing annual revenue requirements and establishing customer rates. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. Second by Reverend Newbill. Any other questions of Mr. Wanamaker on this issue?
Did you say 32 or 34?
$34.5 million is the current unfunded amount.
Thank you. Any other questions? All in favor of adopting the recommendation from staff, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimously carried. Thank you, Mr. Wanamaker.
Thank you.
You're still on the board.
I am still on the board. I think I've got, I close this out here, I think. The second item is related to the treatment of certain one-time expenses associated with the shutdown of SGRPP. As part of the shutdown of SGRPP, JEA has incurred certain costs associated with the termination of certain rail car leases, transportation agreements, and fuel disposal. These fuel-related shutdown costs are expected to total $25 million, including $14 million in FY 2018. These costs were all included in the calculation of shutdown costs and were part of the settlement negotiations and payment that we received from FPL. As stipulated in the board's pricing policy, in the normal course of business, these types of items of expenses would typically be recorded as a fuel expense and paid for from fuel revenues. However, because these one-time items are associated with the shutdown of SGRPP, staff recommends that these items be paid out of the proceeds that we received from FPL as intended. And this would reclassify these items as operation and maintenance expenses from a fuel expense. These changes will have the added benefit of reducing pressure on the fuel stabilization fund balance. And in order to effect this change, we're asking the board for approval for a reclassification of these one-time items. And I'd be happy to take any questions on that item as well.
Any questions of Mr. Wanamaker on this issue? Ms. Johnson?
None for me. Thank you.
Ms. Green?
The long-term annual savings, we don't we haven't done any calculations to figure out to project what that would be, have we?
As it relates to the shutdown of SGRPP?
Yeah.
So the total savings that were projected when we shut down the facility were around $40 million a year. I think the net present value was about $450 million.
And then the funds that we are receiving from FP&L, what are those numbers?
So we received a shutdown payment from FP&L that was associated with their portion of certain shutdown-related items. That payment, together with other funds that they had on deposit, was about $130 million. And then they committed to cover 20%, their share of the remaining environmental remediation and shutdown costs.
And how are those funds funded
They funded us the money at shutdown.
at shutdown?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have that money currently.
Okay.
So what we're asking with this item, what we're asking is to use that money
Yeah.
to pay for these costs.
Just want to be clarity on what those amounts were. Thank you.
Perfect questions, yeah.
Reverend Newbill. And just to follow up on Ms. Green's question, these costs were already reflected in the savings number that you just gave.
Absolutely.
Not new expenses. Yeah, thank
Absolutely.
you. Mr. Cumber.
I've got three quick questions. Just one is a follow-up to Ms. Green. As we look back on the the calculation that we came up with at shutdown on what FP&L owed us, have we since then found any costs that we had forgotten to put into that calculation that we're now incurring 100% of because it wasn't part of the shutdown transaction?
No, in fact, I think some of the costs, frankly, have come in very favorably.
Okay, let's not tell FP&L that. And then I just wanted to make sure the reclassification that you're asking for today, I assume E&Y, our auditors, had no issue with that reclassification.
Yeah, again, it's part of the reason we're coming to the board, because these expenses have been mandated to be paid out of those fuel revenues.
Right.
And so we needed board approval to be able to fund it from a different bucket, so to speak.
But is it fair to say that the board would be acting today where our auditors would be in agreement if we took the vote that there were no issues?
Yes.
Okay. And then the last thing is, at the last board meeting, I know we talked about the fuel fund, because of the rate change that we had made, was in a situation that we would have to readdress that as a board. I assume this gives us a little more flexibility with the overall fuel fund for the rest of the calendar year, if not
It
the
does.
following fiscal year.
Yes, and that is a perfect segue into our next presentation, which will talk about the fuel strategy. This is certainly one of those items to help us address that.
Okay, great. I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So the chair will ask for a motion to approve staff's recommendation to reclassify one-time expenses related to the shutdown of SJRPP from fuel expense to O&M expense. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
I'll give that to Ms. Johnson. Is there a second, Ms. Green?
Second.
Any other discussion? Thank you, Mr. Campion. Any other discussion or questions of Mr. Wanamaker regarding the reclassification of this expense? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Campion. Passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Wanamaker. You're still on deck.
Thank you. So our next item is behind tab 4A in your packets, the JEA fuel strategy. Fuel costs are JEA's single largest expense. In 2017, JEA spent more on fuel than on capital and debt service combined. Today, I would like to discuss a critical tool that JEA utilizes to manage these fuel costs on behalf of our customers, the Fuel Stabilization Fund. For those of you who may not be familiar with this fund, I'll provide a brief background. The Fuel Stabilization Fund was established in 2005 to allow for stable fuel charge through commodity market swings. The JEA pricing policy mandates that the target balance for this fund be equal to the greater of the 15% of JEA's highest all-time fuel cost, or the projected 12-month fuel cost. Currently, the highest annual fuel cost was set in 2011 at $630 million, rendering a $95 million target balance. The reason for this discussion today is that the projected balance at the end of fiscal year 2018 is $63 million, or $32 million less than our target per the pricing policy. Today, I will share with you how we got to this level and some of the ways that we can address it. The goal of this presentation is to get your feedback and input. So in order to know where to go from here, it's important to know where we've been. So how did we get here? Part of it was planned. The chart on this page gives a history of the stabilization fund and JEA's fuel rate since 2012. The purple line across the top of the chart represents JEA's fuel charge. As you'll see, in June 2012, the fuel charge was $47.74 per megawatt hour. From 2012 to 2018, JEA reduced that rate to $32.50 per megawatt hour, a 32% reduction in fuel costs. The blue bars represent the fuel fund balance at the end of each fiscal year from 2012 to 2017. As you can see, JEA's fuel costs fell from 2012. The stabilization fund was overfunded, as you can see from those blue bars being above the target balance line. From 2012 to 2015, JEA managed this balance through the use of fuel credits to customers. You guys may remember some of those fuel credits. They were very popular. The orange bars represent the amount of these fuel credits. These totaled refunds of approximately $170 million over that time period. We changed our strategy in 2016. We lowered the fuel rate instead of providing fuel credits. This was done in conjunction with our comprehensive rate restructuring in 2016. At the time, the stabilization fund balance was in excess of $180 million, and the intent was to draw down the fund to the target level over a 2-year period. So that part of our stabilization fund balance was planned, but part of it was not planned. And over the course of 2018, we've experienced some higher than expected commodity prices, especially in January and February, which you will see reflected in the fund drawdown represented by the blue bars on this page. We've also experienced elevated solid fuel costs relative to the past several years. In addition, as we just discussed a moment ago, we have had several one-time expenses related to the SGRPP shutdown that negatively affected the balance. So as I shared, the current level of the fuel stabilization fund was partly planned and partly not. But what else are we doing to manage fuel costs? In addition to the fuel stabilization fund, JEA has an active fuel strategy plan now and for the future. And I'd like to share our action plan at a high level today. On the near-term items, number one, we have hedging strategy. This is already operational. Hedging is a way to mitigate fuel price fluctuations. We are locking in prices that are supportive of our current fuel rate on half of our annual expected gas volume over the next 3 years. The second one is the expense reclassification, which we just addressed, the SGRPP shutdown items just a moment ago. That is not included, I will note, that is not included in the $63 million that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. So that will increase that fund balance by $14 million at the end of the year. The third item is gas prepay contracts. Gas prepays utilize long-term contracts to lock in lower prices. We do not currently have any of these in place, but we would implement agreements incrementally and methodically to reduce our risks. On the longer-term items, on the right side of this page, we have fuel diversity and distributed energy resources. Fuel diversity has been a core strategy since the early 1980s with the use of solid fuel. As technology advances, we will continue to further diversify our energy mix through renewable PPAs and solid fuel. Finally, distributed energy resources includes rooftop solar and batteries, as well as demand response programs, which allow for JEA to control demand and avoid running high-cost units. We will be discussing these strategies further as part of our integrated resource plan. The Fuel Stabilization Fund is in addition to all of these strategies, which help manage our fuel costs. So what is JEA's action plan for the Fuel Stabilization Fund? The options now to address the Fuel Stabilization Fund balance are as follows. Number one is to update the pricing policy. The support for this is the nature of our fuel expense has changed since the target was set. In 2011, it was a high sales year. Sales dropped over 800,000 megawatt hours from 2011 to 2017. Additionally, 2011 was prior to the shale gas boom that has dropped market prices. Our recommendation is to adjust the target to be 15% of the highest fuel costs in the preceding 5 years. The impact of this change would lower the target to approximately $75 million. This would allow for fuel charge stability for our customers while still maintaining appropriate liquidity and reserves that exceed the board's pricing policy targets. The second option is to increase the fuel charge. The fuel charge can be adjusted at board discretion to collect the deficit in the Fuel Stabilization Fund. Based on current market conditions, our fuel charge appears sufficient to cover projected fuel costs over the next couple of years. It is our recommendation to continue to monitor the fuel charge against projected fuel expenses and request an increase only if necessary, as a fuel charge increase will impact all electric customer bills. We believe these recommendations are consistent with the board's strategic framework. So to summarize, staff recommends amending the pricing policy to set the target balance based on the preceding 5 years. This update will ensure the appropriate reserves on an ongoing basis. Additionally, we will come back to the board as necessary to execute other items such as gas prepayments that I've outlined as part of our broader fuel strategy plan. This strategy supports JEA's strategic framework. It's neutral on financial value. It'll bring value to our customers by ensuring near-term stabilization of electric bills, and it will provide community impact value as stable electric rates help promote economic development. Again, this presentation was presented today to get your input and feedback so we can bring action back at a future board meeting. This time I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wanamaker. Mr. Cumber, questions?
Just a couple. So just a couple background. I know you mentioned that our hedging strategy right now is targeted up to 50% of expected volume. What has it been to date?
So that's consistent with what it has been in the past. We've utilized different methodologies over the years. In calendar year 2018, we hedged that amount, roughly half of our average fuel burn for the average gas burn for the year, and so that's consistent with what we've gone moving forward.
Okay. And then my only comment on your options is you give us one good option and then one kind of bad option. So it's like, do I want to feed my kid or starve my kid? It's kind of an easy answer.
Depends on the day.
Look, this is me personally. My personal view is I would not want to revisit the fuel charge in isolation. I think we've got that larger conversation about demand rate that's going to come up. And to me, there's a time to have a holistic conversation on the rate structure for JEA, and to do it in piecemeal to me doesn't make sense. And so, you know, I would like, obviously, to flush out update the pricing policy, but then are there any other options, creative options that you and your team can think of that doesn't include, you know, tinkering with the fuel charge now, but recognizing that there will be a rate discussion at some point in the future?
So, Mr. Cumber, one of the reasons why this is in the strategy section is we agree with you. You know, the team's done a really good job of taking the hedging strategy and modifying it to some extent to be far more effective going forward, as well as the gas prepay. What I'd say is a new concept relative to managing fuel prices going forward. And but we have not had enough time to flesh out and have a recommendation of substance to be able to have a thorough dialogue about what the impact of that would be. I think where we would envision it is if you were to look at any one of these 5 alternatives on top of the fuel rate, we would come back and have a holistic conversation around that, as well as I think your comment on demand rate has a very good point. So this was intended to just say these are the things we're looking at. If there are questions, perhaps in the interest of time and not to shut anybody down, if they're very long questions that take a lot of follow-up, we could take them as a follow-up in terms of written response, as much as we have done in other strategic conversations. And again, our thought was that before we were ever to come back for any sort of action, we would present more thorough analysis around each one of these different strategies that we're looking at employing. So we agree.
Thank you. Reverend Newbill. Ms. Green.
More information needed, so that would be greatly appreciated.
Ms.
Same
Johnson.
here. More information would be great.
Mr. Campion.
Yes, I like the strategy, and again, more information is always good.
Well, Mr. Wanamaker, I have a couple of quick follow-ups while it's still fresh on our mind. One is, maybe I missed this, but I don't recall any flashing warning lights that we were dipping a third below our fuel stabilization fund target. I'm not asking to add anything more to the dashboard. It's dense enough already. But it was a bit alarming to me when I was reading the materials yesterday that we had fallen that far below our target without sort of waving the hands at the board. So if that was brought up in the past, I missed that. That was a comment, not a question. Question regarding the new proposed formula, which we'll take up at a future board meeting. I assume that's consistent with industry practice or prudent utility practice. Do our peers have similar pricing formulas? Last 5 years seems reasonable to me, but I've not done the survey.
Yeah, that's a great question. All of our peers, there's a smorgasbord of options, really. We have some peers who change the fuel rate monthly and really don't have a stabilization fund. That's one end of the spectrum.
I don't like that one.
And we certainly have other peers who are really actually more on our side of the spectrum, looking at a percentage of the highest all time. I think that from our perspective, the fuels market has changed so dramatically since 2011. To put it into perspective, that number that was set in 2011 of $630 million, the equivalent to that in the FY18 budget is $418 million. So when you think about that amount of movement in our fuel cost over that period of time, it's really been a dramatic shift in the fuel markets. And so I think that looking at it on a preceding 5-year level is still prudent. But frankly, I'm not sure we'd ever get back to $630 million for quite a long time. So I think that this allows it to be a policy target that will stand the test of time. And so I think that's the object.
Thank you. Mr. Zahn?
I think also in as the fuel fund reserve looks backwards and then tries to create some sort of stabilization element, whereas the hedging strategies, gas prepays, the diversity, and the DER type strategies are all far more forward-looking in nature. And so when you start layering them in together, they create a much better protection for our ratepayers.
I appreciate that. And I'll also say that I appreciate the efforts of staff to enhance our hedging strategy. I understand that we've not engaged in intra-month hedging in the past, and the pursuit of the gas prepay contracts, all of which should greatly improve our fuel stabilization policy. So thank you for that extra effort. Any other questions of Mr. Wanamaker on this subject? Well, you're finally off the deck. Thank you.
Thank you.
With apologies to Ms. Stewart.
Just the transition update.
Oh, sure.
One quick.
You've been waiting patiently.
I have been. Ryan hogs all the attention. Yeah. The transition update. This is obviously the summary that is presented monthly, upon which there's an action plan underneath that I've been executing on with the staff. And what I'm happy to announce is We have, the company and team have made a tremendous amount of effort. As you can see, we're almost done with something that I thought would take us well to the end of 2018, and if not into January. And so, again, kudos to the staff. There's one item that's circled in a circle, and I'm not sure action really needs to be identified, but certainly as we've selected McKinsey for strategic planning consultant, it would be very helpful for the board to allocate a chair or some sort of subcommittee liaison as looking forward to interface with management and that consultant as we move forward. And it's more of a just bring it to your attention. It doesn't have to be done today, but want to just bring that up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zahn. Any questions from Mr. Zahn on the transition update? I join you in kudos to the senior leadership team. With lots of other things going on, they continue to keep their eye on the ball. Now, apologies to Ms. Stewart. Despite all of her preparation and being ready today, and despite us having published an agenda calling out Ms. Stewart to make a presentation on electrification, unfortunately, events have intervened. So we look forward to your presentation on another day, but we're going to pass on electrification today. That leads us to old business. I think I'm pleasantly surprised by the absence of media in the room. Is that possible? Old business today takes us to Vogel. Who's back there?
Will. Hey, Will.
Hey, Will. Well, I can only assume that they're all watching on the live cast. Old business brings us to Vogel. Unless you've been living under a rock for the last couple of weeks, you're aware of the fact that JEA is party to a power purchase agreement with MEAG, the Municipal Electric Authority of Georgia. There have been a couple of lawsuits filed this past week. We have noticed a shade meeting, which I'll let Ms. Brooks give a formal call to. But I do want to advise the board that I spoke this morning with the chairman of the board of directors of MEAG, and I have sent him a letter, a copy of which is at your seat this morning, which highlights, and copies will be made available to the media, which highlights the reasons that JEA would like to restructure or exit the PPA with MEAG. Highlighted in that letter is the fact that JEA's senior leadership team has gone out to the market and has secured an offer of replacement power that would entirely replace the contracted for power from MEAG arising with Plant Vogel at a far more economical price, in fact, a price that would save MEAG, Power South, and JEA, the three beneficiaries of the MEAG portion of that project, an aggregate sum of $2.5 billion. In fact, the replacement offer we've received just for JEA would save JEA's customers $1 billion, over $1 billion. So that's a billion reasons for us to seek relief from the MEAG PPA. That offer has been extended to MEAG. It's available as a firm term sheet today for secure generation and energy. It's one that we have urged, I personally urged Mr. Thompson and MEAG to accept. We've also shared with MEAG in that letter the fact that they're contracted for power beyond 2042, which is the current timeline for the sharing of power with JEA, is available at a far more economical basis, in our opinion, than the current Plant Vogel power. So there's really no reason for MEAG to continue with the Plant Vogel project. They have a board meeting currently scheduled for September 20th to vote yes or no on continued construction of Plant Vogel. I urged Mr. Thompson in my telephone conversation and in my letter for MEAG to vote no. If they do, then that project comes to a halt, at least as it relates to MEAG and JEA's participation with MEAG. I also shared with Mr. Thompson in my telephone conversation and in my letter the fact that JEA has filed a petition with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, seeking to have them assert jurisdiction over this PPA pursuant to Section 201B of the Federal Power Act, a regulatory action that places an additional burden on MEAG to prove that the rates that they are going to charge on the energy generated by Plant Vogtle are just and reasonable, which we believe is a difficult burden for them to meet. We are hopeful that MEAG will take into consideration the economic benefits of the replacement offer that we have outlined to them. MEAG and JEA are unique among the Vogtle participants in that we don't have to answer for shareholder returns. Instead, we have a responsibility to our customers. In JEA's service territory alone, we have 50,000 customers at or below the poverty line. We have all of our customers, practically, who view their utility expense as a significant portion of their monthly household budget. I believe that this board owes our customers a duty to seek to save them $1 billion in energy costs. I've encouraged MEAG to take that same fact into consideration in their deliberations. So that's the update on old business as it relates to Vogtle. I'll yield to Ms. Brooks to call a shade meeting, and then I'm going to ask the board to consider a resolution that's also at your chair regarding the litigation. If you want to notice the shade meeting or call it, it's been noticed.
It's been noticed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman of the board and the JEA board members, pursuant to statute, for a litigation shade meeting to take place, the attorneys representing the board is required to ask for or request the shade meeting. So I am, in the Office of General Counsel, is requesting that a shade meeting take place today on the 16th floor of the JEA office buildings, specifically to talk about the strategy related to expenditures in the following two lawsuits. The following two lawsuits is the City of Jacksonville and JEA versus the Municipal Electric Authority of Georgia, case number 2018-CA6197 in the Circuit Court of the 4th Judicial Circuit of Duval County. And the second matter being the Municipal Electric Authority of Georgia versus JEA, case number 118-CV4295 in the United States Court, Northern District of Georgia. Now that I've called the shade meeting, only the certain folks that are allowed to be at the shade meeting that were provided in the notice are allowed to participate, and a court reporter will be in the room. My understanding is she's already set up on 16 for us to go into shade. At the conclusion of the shade meeting, we will come back to the 19th floor and reconvene. And Mr. Campion, I did not have the opportunity to research whether or not you could appear by telephone, but I'm making the decision for you not to participate by telephone, but we will inform you of the lawsuit on a one-on-one at a later time.
No problem.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brooks. So we'll adjourn here in a few moments. Before we do that, as to the two litigation matters that are referenced, particularly City of Jacksonville and JEA versus Municipal Electric Authority of Georgia, and the FERC petition, there is a resolution at the table for each of the members. And I'm sorry, was Mr. Campion provided a copy of the resolution by email?
And I've got to make another apology, Mr. Campion. Things were moving so quickly this morning, I didn't have an opportunity to provide you a copy of the resolution.
Melissa Charlotte provided.
Oh, Melissa
was
Charlotte?
No, I have the resolution.
Oh,
I have
thank you.
it.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, Melissa C.
But again, this resolution was crafted by me, and there are a couple of minor adjustments I would like to suggest or request. On the second page, the third whereas clause on that page, could you please add the word JEA after 2018, that JEA filed the petition? And then also on page 3, section 1, at the last conclusion area of that sentence, it says employ all legal strategies to prosecute. Could you please add the words and defend in conjunction with the Office of General Counsel? And with those two modifications to the resolution, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Cumber?
can I just ask, would you maybe just allow us 2 minutes for all of us to
Absolutely.
read this, just so we're not making a motion on something that we haven't read?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I have a couple questions for Ms. Brooks.
And I've got a
when you're
couple of
ready.
clarifications too. I think they're still reading. Before we submit, I'd like to suggest two more small edits. On page 3, section 1, line 2, board hereby authorizes and approves. I'd like that to be revised, authorizes, comma, approves and ratifies. Delete the word of. And then I think in the section 3, third line, termination of the project, instead of lowercase project, I think you've defined that as Plant Vogel Expansion Project. Mr. Cumber?
Ms. Brooks, on the third whereas, it says JEA estimates the construction cost will be over $30 billion. Wasn't there a independent, weren't we notified that it was rising to $30 billion as opposed to it being our estimate?
I'd say the most recent notification we've received was an August 31 financial report from our counterparty, MEAG, which we extrapolated out to in excess of $30 billion. But the only formal announcement from the owners was at 27.5.
27.5.
27.5 billion.
Okay.
But our finance team has looked at it and recalculated, and we believe it's the true numbers over 30, will be over 30 billion.
Is it worth us just adding the fact that we were notified it's 27.5? That's still significantly above the, the numbers on the whereas before. But that way, it's very clear that the owners have also notified us that it is significantly higher.
You'd put that in the third whereas?
I put that in the third whereas, where it's,
So before JEA estimates,
correct.
owners have estimated the construction cost to complete now exceeds 27.5 billion?
Correct.
Okay. I'll let the scrivener capture that,
Owners have estimated that
the construction cost to complete.
Owners have notified JEA that the cost to complete would be $27.5 billion. I believe it was August 31st, 2018.
It was before that.
It was
August
before that.
31 came from Meeeting.
Yeah,
Do we need a date on there or not?
probably not.
Okay, so the owners have notified that, owners have notified JEA that have estimated that the cost
They didn't notify us.
Okay.
Owners have reported,
Publicly announced.
publicly announced, yeah.
publicly announced that the cost to complete
My total expansion fund.
is in excess of $27.5 billion.
Thank you. Mr. Cumber.
All my other comments will be saved for the discussion if there's a motion.
So let me just ask for a motion, then we can come back to further discussion. Chief Legal Officer Jody Brooks has presented a proposed resolution. Have a motion to adopt the resolution.
So moved.
I'll take that as a motion by Mr. Cumber and a second by Reverend Newbill. Further discussion, Ms. Johnson.
Just a quick technical edit on, it should be section number 4, page 3,
Thank you.
and then change page 4, section number 4 to 5.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anything else? Ms. Johnson?
No.
Ms. Green?
No.
Reverend Newbill? Mr. Campion? He leave? Okay, Mr. Cumber?
So I am fully supportive of this resolution, and I don't mean this to probably come out as blunt as it will. We are leaving the discretion to Mr. Zahn and Ms. Brooks to pick the right team to fight this.
Yeah, I'll just interrupt. General Counsel Office is defending and prosecuting and chooses the team. That's
Okay,
not us.
fair enough.
Yeah.
I just would want to be on the record that I don't know who we used for outside counsel to negotiate the initial deal. And I would hope, it would not have to be stated, but I would hope that OGC and the JEA team will not be relying on the same individuals or firms that got us into this agreement in the first place.
Noted and already addressed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
As I've committed to this board in the past, starting in April, we will continue to provide updates on a frequent basis. I know Ms. Green and I talked, well, Wednesday, but a lot has occurred since Wednesday. I invite each board member to schedule time so as to, with myself and the team, whenever they need, and we will make ourselves available. As you can imagine, it has been a pretty long week for this entire team running the company on a status quo basis, as well as dealing with this issue. In candor, we did actually work over the last 2 to 3 months to try and find a commercially reasonable solution that was mutually agreeable to all parties. As you will have undoubtedly have read the communications that have come out from my office that have attempted to reach out to each one of the owners, but unfortunately were rebuffed with no responses. And so it's unfortunate we are where we are, but we need to do it is in the best interest of our ratepayers. And at this point in time, it appears as though we have no other conclusion but move forward.
Any other questions from the board, comments on the resolution? I have one. I keep correcting myself, and Mr. Zahn has corrected me. I prefer to refer to JEA's customers as customers, not ratepayers. So I'm trying to get out of the industry jargon. If you'll accept that as a friendly amendment, Mr. Cumber and Reverend Newbill, that appears in a couple of places, JEA's customers. If there's no other discussion, I'd like to ask for a vote to approve the resolution as presented and edited.
So moved.
Any opposed?
So moved, yes.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Campion.
Aye.
Aye, aye. Thank you.
Aye.
All right. No nays, unanimously approved. We're going to adjourn the meeting for a shade.
Recess.
Recess the meeting, thank you. Recess the meeting for a
Mr. Chair?
shade meeting on
I'm
16.
sorry, there's just one quick thing, because I can't talk to everybody, so I do want to give an update on the CEO search if I can, 30 seconds.
Oh, we're coming back.
We are coming back?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're just
Absolutely.
recessing, going into
Shade,
shade.
yeah, and we're coming back.
And then coming back and
Yeah.
complete the
How
rest of the
exciting.
agenda of
That's
the
right.
meeting.
That's exactly right. So we stand in recess. And board, please join council on 16. left off at agenda item 6B, other new business having concluded. Well, actually, let me just ask, any other old business? New business? Open discussion. It's an opportunity for all the board members to bring up issues of concern to them, not all otherwise on the agenda already.
Mr. Chair, is this the appropriate place to give a update on the search process?
Old or new or open, yes. I'd love to get a search committee update. Mr. Cumber.
Thank you. So just want to provide everybody an update since we had promised that we would move pretty quickly towards an end-of-the-year decision. There are 3 days of interviews that have been held on the search committee's calendar, October 9th, 10th, and 11th. We plan on then meeting on October 17th to narrow down the candidates. I can't tell you what we'll narrow down to without actually knowing the quality of the people that we'll be interviewing. Hydrick and Struggles is doing a great job identifying candidates for interviews. They've gotten strong feedback and interest on the job posting, so I feel confident that we will have a good 3 days on October 9th, 10th, and 11th. And before those interviews, members of the search committee will get a list of interview questions that Hydrick and Struggles has put together to kind of guide the interview process. Right after October 17th, Melissa is going to be working with everyone's calendar to hold additional time for one-on-one interviews for not only the 4 people on the search committee in case they want to interview anybody again, but the 3 that are not, to make sure that you have adequate time to interview the short list. We will meet at our November 27th meeting, and the goal is a public interview that each of the shortlisted candidates will do. Mr. Chair, I probably do want to alert you to the fact that I know we have a 2-hour meeting scheduled for that day. It may make sense to, I throw it out for consideration, either have a very short agenda that day and have most of the time devoted to this, or extend the meeting on everyone's calendar, just knowing that that's going to take place there.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. I already spoken with Mr. Zahn. We've got a very abbreviated meeting scheduled for that date, and it will be devoted primarily to candidates for CEO.
Perfect. And then at that meeting, we will either take a motion if there is one, or we can, come back on December 11th and make a final decision. But that is the timeline that we're working against.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. I appreciate that update. Any questions from Mr. Cumber regarding the search committee and progress to date, timeline? No? I'll just take this opportunity to, somebody have something? No? I'll just take this opportunity to add a couple of thoughts there in the category of old, new, and open discussion. I see Ms. Kilgo's return. Ms. Kilgo, can we expect a report on the RFP for the new campus at our next board meeting? And you anticipate that RFP to be ready 1st of October, first week? Thank you, Ms. Kilgo. Record reflects she said yes. You're pinned down now. Any other old, new, or open discussion items? I'll turn it over to Mr. Zahn for the CEO report.
I'm surprised you didn't ask about it. The telecom RFP
I wrote it down.
will also be ready over the next month to go out.
Fantastic.
And that RFP is in finding an agent to help us explore some of the strategies that were discussed. I believe it was in July or August at that board meeting. Very briefly, in furtherance of our JEA's historical approach towards helping our neighbor, 10 crews of JEA Frontline left Saturday to help with restoration of Florence. I believe they actually are on return now, but we commend them, and certainly I think they'll deserve a welcome back, and thank you and good job when they return. And with that, I'll end.
Thank you. I'll just have a couple of items for the chair's report. One is I'd note that the JEA United Way program, annual giving program, is well underway. It doesn't close until November 30th. but senior leadership team, Ted Hobson, did in fact win the Pinewood Derby, so he gets a shout out for that, bringing his engineering skills to bear there. And also, all of the JEA team members do a wonderful job. I happened to learn a couple of weeks ago of an outstanding job done by one of Carrie Stewart's team members, Elizabeth Paulson, who went really above and beyond to reach out to a member of our community, elder member in a poverty situation, to really help him out. So shout out to Elizabeth Paulson, one of your team members. And many thanks go to the senior leadership team in the midst of a lot of other stuff going on, keeping their eye on the ball, working and meeting with them within their own team, and then with over 400 managers this past month to really develop and fine-tune JEA's guiding principles. Tremendous undertaking throughout the organization, so many kudos to the SLT for that. We just concluded a SHADE meeting. I want to thank the legal team, the Office of General Counsel, Mr. Gabriel, Jody Brooks, who's put in countless hours over the last week or two in connection with some litigation matters. Thank you for all of your time, really above and beyond the call. Is there anything else to come before the board? Our next meeting will be October 16th. We stand adjourned. Thank you.